1965 to 1978, Project Serpo, Human-Alien Exchange Program, Part 20. The following story is either the greatest kept secret of all time or a complete fraud. You decide. In this episode, we hear about the Russian Roswell incident from a Russian perspective. This presentation is of the information posted on the website serpo.org from a retired senior government official. The website was intended to facilitate the gradual release of confidential documents pertaining to a top-secret exchange program of 12 U.S. military personnel to Serpo, a planet of Zeta Reticuli, between the years 1965 to 1978. 9.2 Russian version of the Russian Roswell incident. Retired KGB Major Ivan writes, I do recall the incident posted on the American email system by this Victor, but the details are all wrong. The incident happened on January 11, 1985. On the early morning hours of January 11th, radar stations in northern Siberia registered two unknown flying objects coming into the Soviet Union. The two radar objects flew at great speeds and registered at 2,000 kilometers per hour. Soviet air defense systems launched 4 interceptor airplanes to identify the radar objects. Strategic Forces Chief of Staff, GURVO, was notified. It was difficult to track these radar objects. They were flying so fast or at great speeds, the interceptors could not catch or track the objects. A Soviet general who was in charge of air defenses for the northern sector, Siberia, claimed the objects were missiles because of the great speeds they were traveling at. In our country, the general alerted all interior defense sectors. The Soviet Union had a perimeter of air defense from the exterior frontier to the interior. The interior radar sites could not track the two objects because they were traveling too fast. Border guards and the Chief Directorate sent controlled messages updating GURVO. They would be on the radar screens for just a few seconds compared to a regular flying aircraft that would appear for minutes. The general also said the two objects were flying erratically. The objects were flying from a high altitude to a lower altitude within just a few seconds. No normal airplane could fly like that. This worried many Soviet command staff personnel. Soviet radar lost track of the two objects in the central part of the country. A brief radar contact was observed north of Bratsk. Sometime around noon on January 11th, Soviet internal police reported residents of Samurova advised a strange object in a collective farm field. Police arrived in Samurova from Chermkova and Kuta. 2 police officers drove to the object. They observed a second object flying directly above the ground object. The police officers tried to radio their command center in Chermkova, but their radio did not work. The police officers did not see any occupants from the object. The police officers drove away and their radio worked again. About 15 minutes later, the object flew away from Samurova. The police officers notified the Soviet military base in Chermkova and warned them of the two objects flying east. A military helicopter flew from Chermkova west towards Samurova. The 2 pilots later reported seeing the two flying unknown, unidentified objects east at a higher altitude and at a great speed. The objects flew directly towards a missile site. Soviet Military Command Central notified the missile base and warned them of the intruding flying objects. The ICBM Chief Directorate Chief was sent an urgent controlled message. The missile base went on high alert, priority alert in Russian. Military guards watched the two objects approach the missile base. One of the objects flew very low over the base. Military guards fired anti-aircraft guns at the approaching object. The bullets, shells struck the enemy object, but were absorbed or passed directly through the object. The craft glowed a bluish-green color and then landed. Military guards surrounded the object. Personnel from the 2nd Chief Directorate, in conjunction with GRUMRVD, responded. The object opened a door, and a bright light appeared in the doorway. 5 occupants walked out of this light and onto the ground. Military guards ordered the occupants to lie down. The order was given in Russian. The 5 occupants did nothing and stood together. One of the military commanders gave instructions in English, but the occupants still did nothing. One of the occupants walked towards the military guards. One military guard fired a rifle and hit the occupant in the chest. The occupant fell to the ground. The other 4 occupants walked to the fallen occupant and just sat on the ground. Military guards surrounded the 5 occupants and pushed them with their rifles in a gesture towards a military vehicle. The 4 occupants carried their fallen comrade to the military vehicle. The occupants were driven to a detainment facility, confinement facility in Chermkova briefly. They were transferred to a bigger vehicle and taken to a military compound in Irkutsk. The Military Intelligence Interrogation Building within the Irkutsk Military Command Central was used. Military officials attempted to interrogate the 4 occupants. Many different languages were used: English, Spanish, German, but the occupants never acknowledged any language. The injured occupant received first aid by a Soviet military doctor. The doctor told the commander in charge that the injured occupant was not human. The injured occupant's blood was thick white fluid. The internal organs of the occupant were different than humans. The occupants were radiographed, X-rayed. The occupants were described as being approximately 1.2 meters in height and weighed approximately 100 kilograms. The occupants had no ears, no thumbs, small horizontal openings for mouths, and no hair. The occupants were wearing identical one-piece flying suits, gray in color. Suddenly, eventually, the injured occupant stood up and walked to the other occupants. The injured occupant seemed healed. The occupants had no weapons or other equipment on their persons' bodies. GRU officials arrived and took over the interrogation. One KGB official was on scene with the GRU. Commander GRU Marty received a controlled urgent message updating the status of the occupants and craft. Military officials examined the occupants' craft. It appeared the craft was not made from any technology known to the military officials examining the craft. The interior of the craft was very small. Only small Soviet military officials could enter. No instrument panels or navigation controls were observed. There was one display panel, which appeared to be similar to a television screen. Small hand IND-IONS were located on the display panels. The occupants were transferred from Irkutsk by a Soviet military plane to Moscow. The occupants' craft was loaded onto a large truck and driven to Irkutsk. The occupants arrived in a location south of Moscow and detained inside a confinement center. They were given water and food, Russian black bread and soup. The occupants did not eat or drink. Several interrogation sessions occurred with the occupants by KGB and Soviet military linguists from the 2nd Chief Directorate and the KGB Language School were present, but the occupants never spoke nor communicated. On January 14, 1985, in the early morning hours, the 5 occupants escaped from their confinement rooms, cells. A large search was initiated, but the 5 occupants were not found. The captured craft was stored in a hangar at a military base. On January 14, 1985, the craft flew out of the hangar, destroying the hangar door with a bluish beam of light. This was the end of the incident. This incident became very secretive within the KGB and GRU. Many senior officials within the Kremlin were worried, but it seemed that the Kremlin knew something about these crafts. Senior officials were not surprised, but only concerned about the successful penetration into the country. GUCOS and GURVO updated reporting procedures and debriefed personnel. Source: Serpo.org via Maurice Osborne. My take: pretty close to the American version. Anyways, Serpo is now completed. Any thoughts?
Don't forget to sign up for our Patreon page. Members get early access to videos, ad-free, and you can see content you can't see anywhere else.